I buried the woman I loved more than life itself on a Tuesday morning in September, only to find her standing in my kitchen 3 months later, very much alive, with a wedding ring I'd never seen before. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Frank Patterson, coming to you from my little home office here in Tucson, Arizona. Before we dive into today's story, I've got to tell you something that breaks this old man's heart. We've got over 200,000 people watching these videos every month, but only 4% of you are actually subscribed to the channel. That means 96% of you beautiful souls aren't getting notifications when I post new stories, and that just makes me sad, folks. Real sad. So if you're enjoying what you hear, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, it helps me out more than you know, and it means the world to an old-timer like me. Now, what I'm about to tell you happened to me 52 years ago, back when I was just 18 years old, fresh out of high school in a little town called Cedar Falls, Iowa. Some of you might think this story sounds too crazy to be true, but I swear on my late wife Margaret's memory that every word I'm about to tell you is exactly how it happened. And before you ask, yes, Margaret knew this story. She was the one who convinced me I should share it with all of you. It was the summer of 1973, and I was working at my uncle's construction company, saving up money for college. I was supposed to start at Iowa State in the fall, planning to study engineering just like my old man wanted. But then I met her, Rebecca Lynn Morrison. Becky, she liked to be called. She had strawberry blonde hair that caught the sunlight like spun gold, green eyes that could stop traffic, and a smile that could make you forget your own name. I first saw her at Miller's ice cream parlor on Main Street. She was working behind the counter, wearing this little pink uniform with a white apron, humming some song I didn't recognize while she scooped chocolate chip mint into a cone. When she looked up and saw me standing there like some kind of fool, she just smiled and said, "Well, you gonna order something? Or are you just gonna stand there catching flies?" I must have turned red as a tomato because she started giggling. And that giggle, folks, that was it for me. I was done for, completely and utterly smitten. "What's good here?" I managed to stammer out. "Everything's good, honey," she said, leaning forward on the counter. "But I make the best chocolate shake this side of the Mississippi. You want to give it a try?" I nodded like an idiot and watched her work. She moved with this easy grace, like she was dancing instead of just making a milkshake. When she handed it to me, our fingers touched for just a second, and I swear I felt electricity shoot right up my arm. "That'll be 50 cents, she said. I fumbled around in my pocket, dropped my change all over the floor, and had to scramble around picking up nickels and dimes while she watched, still giggling. When I finally got back up, she was shaking her head with this amused expression. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked. "Born and raised," I said. "Frank Patterson. Live over on Elm Street." "Well, Frank Patterson from Elm Street. I'm Becky Morrison from Maple Avenue, and you're either really nervous or really clumsy." "Both," I admitted, and that made her laugh out loud. "I get off work at 6, she said, wiping down the counter. "There's a movie playing at the Starlight Drive-In. You interested?" Was I interested? Folks, I would have walked through fire for this girl. That first date turned into a second, then a third, and before I knew it, we were spending every free moment together. Becky was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was smart as a whip, funny as hell, and she had this way of looking at the world like everything was an adventure waiting to happen. She'd grown up on a farm outside town with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Her grandmother, Miss Eleanor, was this tiny little woman who could bake like nobody's business and had more wisdom in her pinky finger than most people have in their whole body. Becky and I would sit on the porch swing at Miss Eleanor's house, talking until the fireflies came out. She told me about her dreams of traveling to California, maybe becoming an actress or a teacher. I told her about college, about engineering, about all the plans I'd made that suddenly didn't seem as important as they used to. We went swimming at Cedar Lake, had picnics in Riverside Park, and spent hours walking the old railroad tracks that ran behind the grain elevator, just talking about everything and nothing. She made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world, like every dumb joke I told was hilarious, like every thought I had was worth hearing. By August, I was head over heels in love, and miracle of miracles, she seemed to feel the same way about me. "Frank," she said one evening, as we sat watching the sunset from the hood of my old Chevelle, "what are we gonna do come fall?" I'd been dreading that conversation. College started in 3 weeks, and Cedar Falls was 2 hours away from Ames. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe I could come back every weekend." She was quiet for a long time, just staring at the orange sky. Finally, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I love you," she said. "I know we're young, and everybody's gonna say we're crazy, but I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my whole life." "I love you too," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Becky, I want to marry you." The words just came out. I hadn't planned to say them, but there they were, hanging in the air between us. She stared at me for what felt like forever. Then she started crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, yes." We drove straight to Miss Eleanor's house to tell her the news. The old woman took one look at our faces and started crying herself. "Oh, you beautiful children," she said, pulling us both into a hug. "I've been praying you'd figure it out." Miss Eleanor had her late husband's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had been in the Morrison family for 3 generations. She pressed it into my hand with shaking fingers. "Harold would have wanted Becky to have this," she said. "He always said love like yours only comes around once in a lifetime." We decided to get married the day before I left for college. It would be a small ceremony, just family and close friends. Becky would come with me to Ames, get a job while I went to school, and we'd start our life together. But first, there was one thing I had to do. I had to tell my parents. Folks, let me tell you, that did not go well. My father hit the roof, started yelling about how I was throwing my life away, how I was too young to know what love was, how I was going to ruin my chances at a good career. My mother cried and begged me to wait, to think about it more, to at least finish my first year of college before making such a big decision. "That Morrison girl has you wrapped around her little finger," my father said. "You're thinking with your heart instead of your head, son, and that's going to lead you straight into poverty and misery." But I didn't care. I was 18, I was in love, and I was convinced I knew better than everyone else. The night before our wedding, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting out of bed and looking at that ring Miss Eleanor had given me, thinking about how in just 12 hours Becky would be my wife. Mrs. Frank Patterson. The thought made me giddy. Around 3 in the morning, I decided to drive out to the lake. I needed some air, some space to think. I took the long way around, past the Morrison farm where Becky and Miss Eleanor were probably both fast asleep. That's when I saw the car. It was a black sedan, parked in the driveway with its headlights off. I slowed down as I passed, trying to get a better look. The license plate was from out of state, though I couldn't make out which one in the darkness. Something about it made me uneasy, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe Miss Eleanor had family visiting for the wedding. I drove to the lake, sat on the dock for an hour watching the water, then headed home. When I passed the farm again, the car was gone. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding. I put on my father's old suit, the one he'd worn to marry my mother, and drove to the church with my heart hammering in my chest. The ceremony was supposed to start at 10 o'clock. By 10:15, Becky still hadn't arrived. "She's probably just nervous," said Pastor Williams. "Brides are always running a little late." By 10:30, I was getting worried. By 11, I was starting to panic. "I'm going to drive out to the farm," I told my best man, Tommy Rodriguez. "Something's wrong." The closer I got to Miss Eleanor's house, the more my stomach churned. When I pulled into the driveway, I knew immediately that something terrible had happened. The front door was standing wide open. Miss Eleanor's old tabby cat was sitting on the porch, yowling like his heart was broken. I ran inside, calling their names. The house was empty, but it looked like someone had left in a hurry. There were coffee cups still sitting on the kitchen table, half full and cold. Becky's wedding dress was laid out on the bed in the spare room, but her suitcase was gone. In the living room, I found a note on the mantelpiece. It was addressed to me in Miss Eleanor's shaky handwriting. "Frank," it read. "Becky's father came for her. She had to go. Don't try to find her. I'm sorry. Eleanor Morrison." Her father. Becky had told me her parents were dead. They died in a car accident when she was 12. I'd asked her about them dozens of times. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Coleman was a friend of my family, and I knew he'd help me figure out what was going on. "Sheriff," I said, bursting through his door. "Something's happened to Becky Morrison and her grandmother. They're gone." Sheriff Coleman looked up from his paperwork with a frown. "Slow down, Frank. What are you talking about?" I told him everything. The missing women, the note, the mysterious car I'd seen the night before. He listened patiently, then picked up the phone and made a few calls. 20 minutes later, he hung up and turned to me with the strangest expression on his face. "Frank," he said slowly, "I just talked to the state police, and they ran the Morrison name through their system. There's no record of any Eleanor Morrison ever living in Cedar Falls. No property records, no tax records, nothing." "That's impossible," I said. "She's lived here for decades. Everyone knows Miss Eleanor. I'm telling you what they told me. According to their files, that farm has been empty for 15 years, ever since old Henrik Larson died." I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Sheriff, I've been to that house 100 times. I've eaten dinner there. I've met the neighbors." "What neighbors, Frank?" And that's when it hit me. In all the times I'd visited the Morrison farm, I'd never seen another soul. No neighbors working in their yards, no mail carriers, no delivery trucks. It was always just Becky and Miss Eleanor, living in this bubble of perfect isolation. Sheriff Coleman drove out to the farm with me. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt like I was losing my mind. The house was falling apart. The paint was peeling, The porch was sagging, and weeds had grown up through the floorboards. When we went inside, our footsteps echoed in empty rooms filled with dust and spider webs. There were no coffee cups on the kitchen table, no wedding dress laid out on the bed, no sign that anyone had lived there in years. "Frank," Sheriff Coleman said gently, "I think you need to talk to somebody. Maybe see Doc Peterson." But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd experienced. I had pictures of Becky and me together, didn't I? I raced home and tore through my bedroom, looking for the snapshots we'd taken at the lake, at the ice cream parlor, at the county fair. I found the camera, but when I developed the film, every single picture of Becky came out blank, just empty frames where she should have been. The ring was gone too. Miss Eleanor's family ring that she'd pressed into my hand with tears in her eyes. I searched everywhere, turned my room upside down, but it had vanished completely. I spent the next 3 months in a kind of fog. I went to college like I was supposed to, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept thinking about Becky, wondering where she was, if she was safe, if she even remembered me. My parents and friends all assumed I'd had some kind of nervous breakdown. They treated me with kid gloves, like I might fall apart at any moment. Nobody wanted to talk about Becky or the wedding that never happened. After a while, I stopped bringing it up, but I never stopped thinking about her. Then, just before Christmas, I was home for winter break. I was sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast when I heard someone humming in the backyard. The same song Becky used to hum when she was working at the ice cream parlor. I looked out the window and nearly fainted. There she was. Becky Morrison, looking exactly the same as she had 4 months earlier, hanging laundry on our clothesline like she lived there. I ran outside so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. "Becky!" I shouted. "Becky, where have you been? I've been looking everywhere for you." She turned around slowly, and when she saw me, her face went white as a sheet. "Frank," she whispered, "how did you find me?" "Find you? You're in my backyard. Where have you been? What happened to Miss Eleanor? Why didn't you come to the church?" She stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Church? What are you talking about? And who's Miss Eleanor?" "Your grandmother, the woman you lived with. We were supposed to get married." Becky shook her head, backing away from me. "Frank, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a grandmother, and we've never met before in our lives." That's when I noticed the wedding ring on her left hand. A simple gold band, but not the same one Miss Eleanor had given me. This one was newer, shinier. "You're married," I said, my heart sinking into my stomach. "Yes," she said, looking confused and frightened. "To my husband, David. We moved here last week from Des Moines. I don't understand what's happening right now." "Becky, please," I said, taking a step toward her. "It's me. Frank. We spent the whole summer together. We fell in love. You worked at Miller's ice cream parlor." "I've never worked at an ice cream parlor in my life," she said. "And I've never seen you before. I think you have me confused with someone else." But it was her. The same strawberry blonde hair, the same green eyes, the same face that had been haunting my dreams for months. Even her voice was exactly the same. "Becky Morrison," I said desperately. "You lived with your grandmother on Maple Avenue after your parents died in a car accident." She was backing toward the house now, clearly terrified. "My name is Rebecca Johnson now, but it used to be Rebecca Walsh. My parents are alive and well and living in Des Moines. They're coming for Christmas dinner next week." "That's impossible," I said. "I'm calling the police," she said, and ran into the house. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Coleman showed up again. This time, he had backup. "Frank," he said, stepping out of his cruiser. "We need to talk." I tried to explain, but it sounded insane even to me. The woman who lived in the house behind ours was named Rebecca Johnson, married to David Johnson, and they just moved to Cedar Falls from Des Moines, where David had gotten a job at the bank. She'd never lived on a farm, never worked at an ice cream parlor, and certainly never agreed to marry some boy she'd never met. When Sheriff Coleman showed her my picture, she confirmed that she'd never seen me before in her life. They didn't arrest me, but they strongly suggested I stay away from the Johnson family. Mrs. Johnson filed a restraining order, and I was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times. I did some research at the library. There was no record of any Rebecca Morrison in Cedar Falls. Miller's ice cream parlor had been closed since 1970, 3 years before I met Becky. The building was now a hardware store. But I knew what I had experienced. I knew Becky Morrison had existed, even if nobody else remembered her. Over the years, I developed a theory. Maybe somehow, in some way I couldn't understand, I'd fallen in love with a woman from a different timeline, a different version of reality where she was Rebecca Morrison instead of Rebecca Walsh, where her parents had died instead of living, where she worked at an ice cream parlor that had closed years before I met her. Maybe that summer had been some kind of glitch in the universe, a crack between worlds that let me experience a love story that was never supposed to happen. I never saw Becky again after that day in my backyard. The Johnsons moved away about 6 months later, and I never found out where they went. I finished college, got my engineering degree, moved to Arizona, married my sweet Margaret, and had 3 wonderful children. But I never forgot that summer. I never stopped wondering about the woman I loved, who may or may not have existed, about the wedding that never happened, about the ring that vanished into thin air. Margaret knew the story, of course. I told her everything on our second date. Figured she had a right to know she was marrying a man who might be completely crazy. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then kissed me and said, "Frank Patterson, if you're crazy, then you're the best kind of crazy there is." She never doubted me, never made me feel like I was losing my mind. She said she could see the love in my eyes when I talked about Becky, and love like that doesn't come from imagination. 2 years ago, Margaret passed away after a long battle with cancer. While I was cleaning out her jewelry box, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a ring, a simple gold band, old and tarnished, wrapped in a piece of tissue paper. Tucked inside the tissue was a note in Margaret's handwriting. "My dearest Frank," it read, "I found this in your jacket pocket the day we got engaged. I could tell it meant something to you, something you weren't ready to talk about yet. I've kept it safe all these years. I hope someday you'll understand why it was meant for you to find. All my love, Margaret." It was Miss Eleanor's ring, the one that had disappeared from my room 50 years ago. The one that should never have existed if Becky Morrison was just a figment of my imagination. I had it authenticated by a jeweler here in Tucson. It's definitely from the 1940s, definitely belonged to someone named Harold Morrison, based on the inscription inside the band. But there's no record of any Harold Morrison ever living in Iowa. I don't know what to make of it, folks. I don't know if Becky was real, or if I experienced some kind of elaborate hallucination. I don't know if she existed in another timeline, or if love can sometimes be so powerful that it creates its own reality. What I do know is that for 3 months in the summer of 1973, I experienced the most intense, beautiful, perfect love I've ever known. And whether it was real or imagined, it shaped the rest of my life. I learned that love isn't always logical. It doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always last forever or end the way you want it to. But when it's real, when it's true, it changes you down to your very core. I loved Margaret with all my heart. We had 47 beautiful years together, raised 3 kids, built a good life. But there's still a part of my soul that belongs to a strawberry blonde girl with green eyes who may or may not have existed, who may or may not have loved me back in a summer that feels like a dream. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some love stories don't get happy endings. But they're still worth experiencing, still worth remembering, still worth sharing. So that's my story, folks. Make of it what you will. Maybe you think I'm a crazy old man who fell in love with a ghost. Maybe you think there are more things in heaven and earth than we can understand. Either way, I hope it reminds you to hold on to love when you find it, because you never know when it might slip through your fingers like smoke. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think happened to Becky Morrison. Was she real? Was she from another dimension? Was I just a lonely kid with an overactive imagination? I'd love to hear your theories. And folks, please don't forget to subscribe. It really does help this old channel grow, and I've got so many more stories to share with you. Stories about the time I met my future self in a diner in Nevada, about the house in Colorado where time moved backwards, about the woman in New Mexico who claimed she could speak to the dead. Until next time, this is Frank Patterson reminding you that the most incredible stories are the ones that actually happened. Take care of yourselves, and remember to keep your hearts open to the impossible. Thanks for watching Mind-Blowing Stories.